Alright, so what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about Dario Argento and Mario Bava. I wanted to spotlight one film each of theirs to discuss. And for Mario Bava, I'm going to choose Lisa and the Devil from 1973 with Telly Savalas and Elke Sommer. And for Dario Argento, I wanted to talk about Suspiria from 1977 with Jessica Harper. These are two absolutely outstanding films. I recently rewatched both of them and it was an absolutely phenomenal experience. I would happily give a full 5 stars to each of these. I appreciate, obviously, your mileage is going to vary, but for me, I can honestly say for these two films, there isn't a thing I'd change. They're both absolutely phenomenal. Of course, it's select viewing. These are certainly niche, to put it mildly. These aren't for everybody, and I could totally appreciate people who would take one look at each of these films and they wouldn't get it. And that's not coming from an elitist perspective. Like, I could understand someone watching either of these films and saying, man, I couldn't give this any more than 2 stars because they're not for everybody, and that's by design. So obviously Mario Bava is certainly the senior of the two men. He was, in many ways, an influence on Argento. Obviously, throughout the 60s, well, even before that, 50s, 60s, and then into the 70s, while obviously Dario Argento was only getting his start out and he did his first film in 1970 directing wise, whereas by then Mario Bava was a well established name in Italian cinema. But obviously 1973 rolls around and Mario Bava comes up with this Lisa and the Devil, which is, it's for all intents and purposes, it's an art film. It's not a conventional film by any means. A lot of people refer to this as Mario Bava's most unconventional film, and again, this is all by design. And basically what this film is, it is deliberately ambiguous. You'll be totally forgiven if the film loses you. It's totally understandable. And if you come away from the film thinking, I have no idea what the hell I've just sat through, that's okay, because it is, I think, intentionally confusing. And I'll say disorientating, because this film, it's been said that it is very dreamlike. So obviously dreams don't make a lot of sense. So the basic premise of this, Elke Sommer plays Lisa. Hey, who'd have thought? And she's on a trip to Italy, and she basically ends up getting separated from a tour group, and she gets lost. And obviously it's one of these cities, there's a lot of alleyways and back streets, and you could easily lose yourself. And she comes across Telly Savalas, and she instantly realises there's something about him that's just, it seems off. We don't know what it is, but also she, as part of the tour group that she was part of, they'd been shown a mural, basically a mural on one of the walls, and it depicted Satan taking collecting a number of damned souls and taking them to hell. And she instantly realises that there's an uncanny resemblance between the devil depicted in this mural and Telly Savalas. And she basically explains, I've lost my way, can you help me get back to the main square? And he points her down an alleyway and says, oh, that way. Now this is where things change, and this is where the ball starts rolling, because obviously it is all open to interpretation, but one interpretation may be that obviously, yes, Telly Savalas is in fact the devil. And once he points, the alleyway he points her down is basically a pathway over either back in time or into another dimension. Because obviously when the plot gets rolling, it ends up being, if we want to boil it down to its basic terms, it's the Haunted Mansion. You remember the Eddie Murphy movie from 2003? So obviously he goes to this old mansion with his wife and kids. Obviously he plays a realtor, and he's planning on selling the property. So obviously he meets with Nathaniel Parker as Edward Gracie, and it's ultimately revealed that Eddie Murphy's wife is the reincarnation of the woman that Nathaniel Parker was going to be married to. So it's basically that in a nutshell, that Elke Sommer's character of Lisa is a reincarnation, or it can be interpreted that way. So basically she ends up, again, things escalate and escalate. Obviously she's wandering still, she doesn't find a way back to the main square, and she comes across time's moving on as well at this point, so before we know it, it's night time and she's still wandering the streets. And anyway, this car comes along, and it's a very old car, and then there's this aristocratic couple in the car, and obviously the chauffeur, and she asks them for a ride, and anyway she gets so far and then the car breaks down, and as luck would have it, or as fate would have it, or as the machinations of the devil would have it, the car breaks down right outside this stately home where the butler is none other than Telly Savalas. So Telly Savalas comes out to greet them and welcome them in, and they end up agreeing to stay in the night until they can get the car repaired. But then that's where things really, really escalate. And again, really strange things happen, and we don't know how we're supposed to take this, but an interpretation that could be applied to it, or a particular way that the events can be construed, basically being a reenactment, or basically Elke Sommer's character reliving the events of what happened to her in her past life before she was reincarnated. So basically like past and present colliding, basically. So obviously the events play out, and it ends up then there's a transition as we get towards the end of the film where things have played out, and she's encountered all of the main players, and obviously Telly Savalas has been overseeing the whole thing. The implication being that he's been pulling the strings, he's the master puppeteer behind the whole thing. And basically it was ultimately revealed that the woman who she is the reincarnation of was basically engaged to be married to the Lord of the Manor. But then obviously there was a whole lot of complications, and the father was involved, and she was having an affair with the father, and it ended up with the son killing the father. Then we believe he must have killed her. We see the skeleton of the woman that she's the reincarnation of. So all these things play out, and again we don't know how we're supposed to interpret them. But then obviously there's a transition, and basically she wakes, she sleeps, or she's put to sleep in the bed that was basically in the bridal suite of the house that was going to be there, on the night of her wedding, or the wedding of the woman she's the reincarnation of. So she wakes up the following morning and the skeleton's gone, and obviously no one else is to be found, and the house itself is now a ruin. So she wakes up, and obviously she goes outside, and she can see the whole place, it's been, nature's taken over at this point, the whole thing's a wreck. And then obviously it's near a school, so obviously there's, a school kids playing in the playground, and they see her, and they say she's a ghost. No one's lived there for more than 100 years, so then that kind of clues you in, saying, oh, okay. So again, past and present have collided, and she's played out the events that led up to her death and the death of everyone else involved. But obviously, her being the reincarnation, you know, she's still there. And then she leaves and she heads to the airport, and then she's on the first flight back home. But then she realises no one else is on the plane. And she hears the voice of the captain, and it sounds very, very familiar. And she's going throughout the plane, and as she gets to the front, there is the each of the people she encountered the previous night when she was reliving the events of a past life. They're all there. And she runs up to the cockpit, and obviously she's hammering on the door to get the captain's attention. And obviously the door opens, it's Telly Savalas there, and then there's a really interesting transition that happens, because she collapses to the ground, but as she does, she's then made up to look like the woman from years ago. So basically, the interpretation you can apply to all of this, that her soul was one soul that got away from the devil, but Telly Savalas obviously has become the devil in human form, and he's basically orchestrated this whole thing to lure her back here, you know, her reincarnated self 100 years after the fact, and he's finally got her. Like, because there's a metaphor that's used throughout this thing of dolls, of puppets. Obviously, Telly Savalas has these puppets made, and he has puppets made for each of the characters that we encounter. And there's a scene later, as we get towards the back end of the film, when basically Elke Sommer's been knocked unconscious, and she's laid out in one of the rooms, and Telly Savalas finds her, and he starts taking the measurements. And that's a metaphor, so he's finally got a number. And you know, they even has a line of, I have another doll to make. So this is basically the scene where he's taken her measurements, can essentially be interpreted as the scene in which her fate is sealed, because he's got it at that point, and then it's just basically a question of playing the rest of it out. Like, basically, when she's running, when she makes it back to the town square the following morning and she's hailing a taxi, we see that Telly Savalas is stood in one of the side streets watching her go, and he has a line, you know, where he says, I'm afraid it's all too late, because it doesn't matter where she runs now, he's got a number. And then obviously it's all, you know, ultimately when she gets on the plane, then obviously he punches a ticket. And basically, in true 70s fashion, the ending is abrupt. So obviously it leaves you with this baffling, what the hell have I just watched? How am I supposed to interpret this? You know, I'm unclear as, obviously the interpretation I've applied here is just subjective to me, just what my take on it. I don't know what Mario Bava's definitive intention, or even if he had a definitive intention, you know, because obviously oftentimes they like to leave it, you know, what do you want it to be? You know, we're not going to spoon feed you this thing, you know, we're going to say this and this is what is happening, this is how you need to take it. So it's, of course, it's all up to your individual interpretation. Of course, there's the other thing, it could all just be in a head. It could all just be one long bad nightmare, basically. Because again, movie's very dreamlike, or if you prefer, nightmarish. So who's to say that any of this happened for real? But this is the thing, going back to the whole unconventional side of it. Obviously, this is a film made by Mario Bava later in his career, and there's this whole idea, and Akira Kurosawa talked about this, that obviously he tried in his younger days to work within the studio system, and he tried to make conventional films. But Akira Kurosawa basically said, you know, once he got to, I think it was when I got to 80, I'm not sure the exact age, it could be 80, but basically I'm free now. I'm free to make the films that I want to make the way I want to make them. I don't have to be at the beck and call of the studio. So then obviously in Akira Kurosawa's later life, obviously we got in 1990 Yume, or Dreams, which is a phenomenal film. And again, dreamlike. It was basically, it's a series, it's an anthology film comprised of various segments that are all inspired by dreams that Akira Kurosawa had. But again, that's the sort of film that he made later on in his life, when he felt as though he had the freedom to make films the way he wanted to make them and not have to worry about what the studio was going to say, or indeed how audiences were going to react to the film. And I think this is much the same thing here, because obviously Mario Bava had been doing it, he'd been in the film industry a long time by the time he'd made Lisa and the Devil, so I think it could very well have been in the same line of thinking of Akira Kurosawa, like, no, do you know what, this one's going to be for me. But then, hey, studio system, of course, never lets us down. Obviously, Lisa and the Devil came out in Italy, had its original release, but then it came to the matter of international release, and how are we going, the American distributors took one look at it and said, okay, so Mario Bava made an art film, we can't market this. But the thing is, Lisa and the Devil came out in 1973, the same year as another little film called The Exorcist. So the American distributors got this wise idea in their head. Hey, why don't we repackage this? We'll shoot some extra footage. We'll call it the House of Exorcism. And basically we'll shoot some like frameworking scenes, and we can go with the idea that Elke Sommer's character has been possessed. So basically they took the art film that Mario Bava made and they turned it into an Exorcist rip-off to capitalise on, or to cash in on, the success of The Exorcist. Obviously Mario Bava was none too pleased about this, but it was one of those you realise it was being done with or without him. So obviously we had all this additional footage shot that Mario Bava shot under protest, and it was repurposed and released the following year in America under the House of Exorcism title. Here's the thing. In the Arrow Blu-ray beautiful set that they released, the set contains both versions. It contains the original Lisa and the Devil, and it contains the House of Exorcism. I haven't watched the House of Exorcism, I'll be totally upfront, because there's no need to, because Lisa and the Devil for me is perfect. And it's one of those, just because you can watch something, it doesn't mean you should. And life's too short. And to be honest, from what I can gather, the additional footage that was shot for the House of Exorcism, it's very Z-grade stuff, and poor Elke Sommer, I think, involved in doing some very degrading stuff, and we don't want to see that. It's horrible. But Lisa and the Devil, absolutely gorgeous film, and again, it's you have beautiful music score by Carlos Savina, and I got to tell you something right now. This movie, it has the coolest opening title sequence you're ever going to see. And it's never been bettered, and it never will be bettered. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it's so cool. And it was one of the things that grabbed me the first time I watched it. I'm 10 seconds in, and I'm already sold. But again, this whole thing is, masterpiece is a term that's thrown around so fast and loose now, it doesn't have any real meaning. But yeah, Lisa and the Devil is genuinely, I think, a masterpiece. Obviously Elke Sommer does great, because she, for all intents and purposes, is the lead. Obviously Telly Savalas gets the top billing, but then obviously Elke Sommer's second bill. But yeah, she is the lead. The whole story centres around her. Obviously, Mario Bava has such an eye, in terms of the way the film's shot. It's beautiful, and the location they have for the stately home and the grounds of the home, beautiful grounds. They've really, picked the location was a winner, because obviously most of the action takes place in the one location, so you needed to knock it out the park. You know, when you came to, okay, where's the house that this is all going to go down in? It's going to be that one. Great. I got to just take a moment though to talk about Telly Savalas in this film, because he's having a ball. It's Telly Savalas' performance in this film is something that could be talked about for hours on end, because he's in a totally different movie and it's amazing. And what you have to understand with Telly Savalas, you know, he was obviously his characters were often larger than life, but he himself was larger than life, and he lived a fast lifestyle, and he liked fast women, and he was a big gambler, so there was always gambling debts that need paid. So it was like 73, same year he did his cameo in Horror Express with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, when he comes in and plays Captain Kazan. He has like 10 minutes of screen time, but it was one of those like, Telly Savalas, do you have a couple of days free to come to Spain and shoot this real quick? Absolutely I do, that'll cover a few debts, I'll get those taken care of straight away. And when he plays Captain Kazan in Horror Express, he just comes in, again, because Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are phenomenal in that film, but for 10 minutes, Telly Savalas comes in and he literally hijacks the film, and it's amazing, and he just dials the whole thing up to 11. And it's the same thing here, but here the thing is, he's in it all the way through. It's not just a 10-minute cameo and then it's like, oh no, we get him for the whole thing, and it's spectacular. So it must have been one of those, like, he filmed up real quick in Spain, like, oh man, I've got to get over to Italy to get this next paycheck. But this is the thing, and obviously the whole idea of a paycheck performance has become something of a pejorative term. It's got a strong negative connotation, particularly when in reference to Bruce Willis, but that's not for here. But here, oh no, because Telly Savalas, I don't want anyone thinking that I'm hating on his performance in this when I say, yeah, he did it for the paycheck, but he also was having the time of his life. He took one look at this thing and said, I'm going to do just whatever the hell I want, because I know no one's going to stop me. And it's one of those, it's interesting because Telly Savalas, you look at him and you think, he's one of those guys, I don't think you could direct him. I think you just hand him the script and says, obviously this is the essence of the scene, obviously this is the dialogue, this is giving the bullet points of what we need to happen in the scene, but you just go, because whatever you give us is going to be gold. And there's plenty of times throughout Lisa and the Devil where Telly Savalas is just owning the whole space, like, because there's times when it's just him and a dummy, and he's got so much goddamn chemistry with this dummy that he's carrying. And then there's a whole scene later on, when he's taking the measurements for Elke Sommer to make the puppet out of her, because she's unconscious, she's just laid out in the corner of the room, and he's got puppets over here, he's got a drinks tray over here, he's got some food over here, and it's just Telly Savalas just gliding across the screen. And he comes over here, and he talks to the puppet, and he comes over here, and he has a glass of wine, or whatever it is, and then he comes over here, and then he starts taking Elke Sommer's measurements, and it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious to watch. And again, you know, a lot of it, and this isn't me hating on Telly Savalas, a lot of it probably wasn't acting, because Telly Savalas obviously just had so much goddamn charm and so much natural charisma that he was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna go. And Mario Bava was probably just sat there behind the camera saying, do you know what, I'm just gonna let him go, because this is like Michael Sheen in Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 levels of gold. But it's amazing. Like, it's interesting because obviously you got these two dialed to 11 performances from Telly Savalas in Lisa and the Devil and Horror Express, and then you compare it to something a few years later in Escape to Athena, where he plays Zeno, who's the leader of the Greek resistance, and obviously Telly Savalas, the Golden Greek. It's interesting because even though Escape to Athena is a goof fest, Telly Savalas probably approached that one thinking, okay, well, this is part of the history, you know, my heritage, my history. Obviously, I'm playing this figure who's important, you know, this guy who's an important figure in the Greek resistance, so I'm going to bring some stoicism and I'm going to play it reserved and subdued, and I'm going to actually play it serious. Whereas it's an amazing contrast to what we get here, because man, you know, he's having a ball. But again, you know, you could watch this film for Telly Savalas' performance alone, and there's even scenes. It's interesting I mentioned directing Telly Savalas. There's scenes that play out in this movie where it's almost as though Telly Savalas is directing the scene, because such is his magnetism that he's controlling the whole thing, and the other actors in the scene are like, I have no choice but to just follow suit with whatever the hell he's doing. Honestly, you gotta see it just for Telly Savalas' performance alone. Obviously, Arrow have done this beautiful Blu-ray release. It's available through HMV. But from what I understand, it's also available to stream on Amazon Prime. I think it's free, or there might be a couple of quid to rent it. But if honestly, if there's ever and obviously Halloween's coming up, so you know, if there's a night where you're 3 sheets to the wind and think, you know, I just want to put something on, not to understand it, but to experience it, and just to be led away by Telly Savalas being so goddamn charming. Honestly, just on the strength of that alone, watch this movie. But then obviously you've got the benefit of having a beautifully crafted, masterfully done film by Mario Bava, and obviously there's so much atmosphere in this, and obviously, yes, there is a healthy amount of sleaze, you will be pleased to know, and there is something of a body count, so obviously that's all in there. But yeah, there's a really good, like, you know, obviously element of a mystery, like trying to work out what the hell's really going on here. So that's been more or less the Odyssey into Lisa and the Devil. And again, it's just a film I would happily talk more and more about. But we must talk about Suspiria, because we've talked about the wonderful Mario Bava. Now we have to talk about the equally wonderful Dario Argento. And obviously, the thing about Argento, you know, obviously he was doing stuff in the 60s, like obviously he was involved in writing Once Upon a Time in the West, you know, that was one of his big first things that he was involved with. But then obviously when he finally moved into directing with obviously The Bird with Crystal Plumage in 1970, you know, it's interesting when you look at the films from him, because obviously we had Bird with Crystal Plumage, had Cat O' Nine Tails, and then we had Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and then we had Deep Red. And all of these had been, they had obviously the horror slasher element to them, but they were straight up. They had a strong mystery element to it. The amateur sleuth who's on the case. So there was a strong mystery element to it, but they were always grounded for the most part in reality. You look, obviously, it's certainly the original three. Crystal Plumage, Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and the Cat O' Nine Tails, there was nothing particularly outlandish about what, there were straight up mysteries, be it a reporter who's on the case, or someone who's being blackmailed, or something like that, or someone who witnesses something and then they're intrigued to investigate further. Things started to change with Deep Red, in the sense that there was some elements of telepathy brought into play, which would be further revisited by Dario Argento in Phenomena in 1985 with Jennifer Connelly. So we were starting to bring in elements of the paranormal, but only very, off to the side. Like, it wasn't the main focus. For the most part in Deep Red, it's mainly, the investigation part. All that changed though with Suspiria. I don't know what the hell happened, because we just decided, no, witchcraft's a thing now. It's happening. So Suspiria, 1977. So what this is the first part in the Three Mothers trilogy. So we have the three mothers who are sisters and the witches. So we have one in Rome, we have one in New York, and we have one in Germany. They're the three. So this first film, set in Germany, it's about an American girl named Susie Bannion, played by Jessica Harper. So she's a dance student, and she travels to Germany to enroll in the one of the dance academies there. So she gets there, and it's immediately apparent from the moment she gets there that there's something really not right about this place. And then things escalate and more strange things start to happen. People are going missing. We don't know what's going on. The whole place just has this weird vibe. And Susie Bannion, Jessica Harper's character, for a lot of this film, she gets basically what can only be described as a hex put on her. And that takes her out of commission for a large chunk of this film. She's laid up for a lot of this film. She's in a real bad way. But then obviously she comes around and starts investigating what the hell is going on. Because there's a girl who she befriends, it's a fellow American girl. And obviously she believes that there's something wrong. And one of the girls she knew turned up dead. We see that very early on in the film, and obviously we see the circumstances under which this girl dies, and you think, yeah, there's something really strange going on here. So, and anyway, this girl obviously who befriends Susie, she meets a bad end in turn herself. In a really horrific sequence. It's probably the death scene of this character that is the friend of Susie Bannion. I think it's Sarah, the name of the character. It's a whole elaborate sequence where she's chased throughout the halls of the school and into like the inner passageways, and like up into the attic of the building, and it's a horrific sequence. And again, like we were talking about with Lisa and the Devil, it's very dreamlike. Suspiria is much the same. There's a wonderful quote from the projection booth when they did their retrospective on Suspiria. It's a movie that operates on dream logic. When the movie starts, during the opening credits, there's a bit of narration telling you about Susie Bannion, left America for Germany to enroll in the dance academy, and then it tells you how she landed at the airport and the time she landed. And then there's never any narration after that throughout the rest of the film, and there's a reason for that. Because the facts that have been detailed in that narration, they're the only thing, that's the only thing that we know for sure happens in this film. So she touches down in Germany, goes through the airport, and when she leaves the airport, that's where the dream begins. Or, if you prefer, that's where the spell's cast. Because from the moment she gets there, obviously there's a huge storm, and you can feel the witchcraft in the air. Helped by Goblin's score, of course. Goblin's score throughout this that oftentimes pops up and screams "witch" at us, and you think, oh, thanks Goblin for telling us what's really going on here. But yeah, the whole thing of Suspiria plays out like a fever dream, and there's these long, elaborate sequences, such as the death scene of Sarah, that play out like a full-on nightmare. You know, like she's going from room to room, and this, like, it doesn't, like, obviously in dreams, how certain things happen, you think, you know, rationally or logically, that doesn't make sense. We've got much the same thing here. And also throughout this film, we've got to talk about the real, obviously we've talked about the Goblin Skull there. This film is so beautifully shot and so beautifully lit, and the colours with the red lighting, the blue lighting, the green lighting, you know, most of this of the scenes that take place within the academy, they're all lit like this, and there's a reason for it, because I suppose you can interpret it as, you know, representing the witchcraft that's permeating the whole atmosphere. You know, we're not in the place we're in. We're like, again, we've talked about, obviously in Lisa and the Devil, the character stepping into another dimension. It's like the moment Susie Bannion stepped out of that airport, she stepped into another dimension. But again, both films, you know, reminiscent in the sense that we don't really know how to interpret a lot of the stuff that's going on. Obviously, Lisa and the Devil more so, because obviously it's ultimately revealed in Suspiria that, yeah, don't worry, you know, it's actually witchcraft that's going on. We're being straight up about this at this point, you know, we're not going to try and hide it anymore. No, this is it's genuine witchcraft that's going on, you better believe it. So, obviously, things escalate and escalate and escalate, and obviously Susie Bannion finally realises, oh yeah, this whole dance academy thing, it's a front, because what's actually going on here, there's a whole coven of witches, and even the students are being recruited into the coven. And obviously then, you know, it ultimately ends with obviously Susie Bannion coming face to face with Helena Marcos, who is one of the three mothers, the one in Germany, and they have their confrontation, and obviously it ends up with the entire building going up in flames. But we talk about, you know, obviously how Lisa and the Devil had an abrupt ending. Suspiria does also. Basically, she comes face to face with Helena Marcos. She is ultimately able to kill her. Basically, she takes this. There's a sculpture of a bird with a crystal plumage, appropriately, and she takes one of the crystals and basically kills Helena Marcos with it. And basically, obviously, the witch is killed, the source of the power is removed, so then basically the whole building goes up. So obviously, you know, it's almost as though Helena Marcos's life force was tied directly to the building. So obviously you kill her, the whole thing's gonna go. So obviously then Jessica Harper, she's obviously running full speed ahead through obviously this building while things are blowing up and setting on fire, and you know, obviously it was the 70s, man, so they were genuinely blowing stuff up around poor Jessica Harper. She had to run through this thing, and anyway, she basically staggers out of the doorway and into the rain, and the building's burning in the background. She staggers out of frame, and then boom, credits roll. You have been watching Suspiria. You're goddamn right we have. And what an experience. And again, it's just two absolutely beautifully shot films. But obviously what makes Suspiria stand out so much, there's nothing like it, you know, in terms of the way they use the lighting and the colours, and again just the nightmarish fever dream-esque way that it's shot. What is interesting is it's interesting to compare like those certain moments that Susie Bannion, Jessica Harper, is outside of the academy and is away from the dance academy. Like the scene obviously after Sarah is killed, obviously, you know, the story that Jessica Harper's character's told is that, yeah, Sarah's gone, she left during the night. Okay, that isn't suspicious at all. But Udo Kier is in the movie briefly, although his voice isn't. He's dubbed. So it's revealed that Udo Kier was a friend of Sarah's, and Sarah had been talking to him about some of the strange goings on that were going on at the academy, and Udo Kier's character is the psychiatrist. And it just so happens that in the city there's a convention going on that he's attending. So obviously Susie Bannion makes an appointment to go and visit him at the convention centre, and basically fills him in on what's been going on and gets him advice. A witch is real. Is witchcraft a real thing? But what's interesting, that scene, again, if you were to just look at it casually, it's one of the few scenes in the movie that's shot just like, a typical shot out of another like any other movie. It doesn't feel, it's the one of the few moments where she's been able to get away from the spell that's being cast. It's just shot straight up, nuts and bolts. Like, if you would see that scene in isolation, you wouldn't think that it feels disconnected from the way the rest of the movie feels. And obviously, we talk about locations. Most of Suspiria was obviously shot in Rome, that was doubling for Germany, and obviously a lot of it was just shot on sets on a soundstage in a studio. The scene where she goes to meet Udo Kier, that was actually one of the few scenes that was shot actually on location in Germany. And the building they had for the convention centre, it's the BMW building in Germany. And if you haven't seen this building, it's a fantastic building. It's a very, very impressive building. So obviously you talk about really cool locations in these films. Yeah, the BMW building that they used for that scene in Suspiria, it's really, really cool, and there's been in other Argento films, there's been some really cool locations, like in Deep Red, in the city square, where there's this gorgeous fountain that's still there today, that's just the centerpiece of a couple of scenes. It's a really, really beautiful to look at. It's a really impressive piece, but it's just again, these films that have so much to offer, being very stylish, very beautifully made, obviously awesome music scores, and some real great atmosphere, but also fantastic locations, and obviously again, sleaze, definitely. But what's interesting when you compare Suspiria to other films in Argento's catalogue, actually isn't all that much sleaze in Suspiria, comparatively speaking. Obviously it's still the 70s, so there's still going to be something there. But I tell you what though, you want to talk about questionable stuff. Obviously, this being set at a dance academy, the characters in this, it's a mainly female cast, which is interesting, mainly female cast. There's only a few male characters, and obviously Udo Kier being one of them, but what male characters there are in this, completely ineffectual. And I think it can go to that interpretation of just being helpless under the witch's power, under the spell that's being cast. Yeah. Basically, you've got no chance. But yeah, a mainly female cast. But again, all in the early to mid 20s. But I read that originally Dario Argento wanted to go younger, where you'd have like girls in their early teens. And that would have been dark, man, because there's some real dark stuff that happens in this movie. Some characters get really, really bad stuff happen to them. You think, what, you want like a 12 or 13-year-old girl for this? Fortunately, Dario Argento's dad, who was the producer on the film, basically said, no, Dario, bad, down, no way. And thank God he did, because I could only imagine. Could you? Oh, Jesus. It would have been horror. It would have been very disturbing. But obviously, ultimately, Dario Argento's dad laid the law down and said, no, we're going to have to cast more age appropriately. And thank goodness, because again, that just would have been really, really dark, some of the stuff that happened in this movie. But yeah, again, sleaze, but not too much sleaze. But yeah, Suspiria, it's just, again, it's just such, again, masterpiece. I'm sorry, obviously, I used masterpiece in reference to Lisa and the Devil. I gotta use it here. It's a masterpiece again. There's nothing that I would change about this film. It's so beautiful, you know, and so visually striking. It'll stay with you. But then obviously there's that question. Obviously we've had these two films. Which is the better of the two? And again, this is a difficult thing to talk about, but you know, obviously Mario Bava, there is a connection here, because obviously his influence on Argento, and I think he's referenced in the credits to Suspiria. He's given like a special thanks credit, so clearly his influence on Dario Argento, you know, was one of the things that made Suspiria. Obviously we got to talk about the woman who is an unsung hero in the films of Dario Argento, and that's Daria Nicolodi, who is the mother of Dario Argento's daughter Asia Argento. Now this lady is, yeah, she has a long history with Argento, obviously romantically involved, but she was in a number of Argento's films. She was in Deep Red, she was in Inferno, and she was in Tenebrae. But she played a major role in Suspiria in terms of behind the scenes, because she was very, very instrumental in writing the script, because apparently the idea actually came from her. Apparently when she was younger, her grandmother used to tell her stories, because her grandmother was actually a ballerina and she trained at a dance academy, and apparently the dance academy that she trained at was in fact home to a coven of witches, so that's apparently where the idea came from. And then obviously Dario Argento ran with that and then brought the idea of the three mothers in and went from there. But you talk about obviously the influences that made this film possible, obviously that, but Mario Bava I think obviously had an influence here, and the fact that he's given special thanks. But in terms of the use of colours, because the idea of red, green, blue lighting, that's Bava-esque. You know, you see there is elements of that lighting in Lisa and the Devil, but it's very minimalist. It's used in a sequence that takes place in the latter half of the movie, but it's impactful when it's used, but it's used sparingly. Bava uses it very effectively in some of the sequences in Black Sabbath, which is his film from 1963, his anthology film that was had Boris Karloff and Mark Damon in it. There's some scenes in Black Sabbath where his use of the lighting and the colours, the reds, the blues, the greens, it's very, very impactful. So that's a Bava trick that obviously rubbed off on Dario Argento. But yeah, Inferno's a film that we also have to talk about, but we'll get to that, because if we're just wrapping up this whole thing of Suspiria and Lisa and the Devil, Lisa and the Devil I think is more fascinating, because it's so open to interpretation, and it's a film that will stay with you in the sense that you're turning it over in your head, asking yourself, what was really going on here, you know? Whereas the thing obviously with Suspiria, obviously it'll stay with you because it's so different and out there and visually interesting and so atmospheric, but obviously the mystery is soon solved, because it's like, oh no, it's straight up witchcraft. That's what it is. You know, it's not open to interpretation in that respect. No, it's yeah, there's witches, man. It's crazy. So I think the ambiguity of Lisa and the Devil, and the fact that it's so open to interpretation, that makes it the more interesting. But again, it's not. I don't think it's so simple that you could say one is better than the other. I think Suspiria obviously is the more well known, and obviously was the more internationally successful. You know, obviously it was given big in Italy, and then obviously in America was released by 20th Century Fox, and it made a lot of money. So you can't deny the commercial success of Suspiria, but Suspiria is obviously a masterpiece, beautifully crafted, so you can't just say, it's not as if you could say, well, Suspiria was the commercial success, but in terms of, from a filmmaking artistic point of view, Lisa and the Devil's the Suspiria film. You can't say that because they're both phenomenal films from an artistic point of view. So we're at a bit of an impasse, you know. They're both phenomenal, obviously both, in my opinion, 5 out of 5s. But I think maybe you could say that Lisa and the Devil is the more interesting film because of its ambiguity and the ways you can interpret what's going on. But as I mentioned there, Inferno, to kind of bring this to a close and tie it all together, we must talk about Inferno, because obviously, yes, there was some connection there with Mario Bava and Argento with Suspiria, with Dario Argento giving special thanks to Mario Bava. But Inferno, we all come together for this movie because obviously it's Dario Argento's film. It's the sister film to Suspiria. Obviously we have the events that take place in Germany with one of the mothers, and then we have Inferno, which deals with the witch in New York, but it also introduces us to the Mother of Tears, who is the witch in Rome. So basically Inferno builds upon what was started in Suspiria. But what's interesting about this, because yes, it's Dario Argento's film, and obviously we have our hero Daria Nicolodi. Again, she appears in the film, but she also worked on the story for it as well. But Mario Bava was heavily involved with this one, so this is where the superpowers come together. Because what happened on this one, it was a difficult shoot, this one, because Dario Argento got very ill during the production of this one, to the point where he couldn't continue and he had to step away. And Mario Bava comes into the rescue and he helps get the film over the finish line. It's difficult to say definitively or to quantify what Mario Bava's contributions to this film were, but trust me, they were substantial. And also Mario Bava's son, Lamberto Bava, who obviously did second unit work on Lisa and the Devil, also came in to work on Suspiria with his dad. So you had the two Bavas working with Dario Argento. So this really is the film where the superpowers collide. And obviously Argento did obviously as much as he could, you know, but there was a time where he couldn't physically continue, so enter Mario Bava. And Irene Miracle, who plays one of the main roles in this film, she actually said, I think in one interview, that most of her scenes were directed by Mario Bava. So that kind of puts in perspective how heavily involved Mario Bava was with this one. So I think, again, I may be talking out of turn here because we don't know for sure, but maybe you could say Inferno, it's as much a Mario Bava film as it is a Dario Argento film. I mean, obviously the original concept came from Argento, fine. But obviously Mario Bava was, you know, his efforts were invaluable. You know, I don't think they got this made without him, basically. But what's interesting about Inferno, obviously it is very much you know, there are a lot of similarities between Inferno and Suspiria, as you would expect. We're still dealing with witchcraft and the three mothers, and it's beautiful as well. You know, obviously the production design, like Suspiria, great here. And again, the use of those colours, the reds, the greens, the blues, and there's some really, really cool set pieces. But one of the interesting things about Inferno, and it's something that makes it so fascinating, Inferno, you know, the idea of how something can be perfectly imperfect. This is what we have here with Inferno, because the first half of Inferno is absolutely phenomenal. But then we get into the second half of the film, and this is where things fall apart, and it's frustrating. But again, in the second half, there's still moments of greatness, but the whole thing just falls in on itself in a lot of ways, and it's heartbreaking. And I think this is what makes Inferno so fascinating, because of basically they got it perfect in the first half, and there was greatness in the second half, but they just couldn't make the whole package work, if that makes sense. And again, you've got to maybe attribute that to maybe due to the fact that obviously Dario Argento was so ill during production that he wasn't obviously necessarily firing on all cylinders. And then obviously there's so obviously he did the best he could, and obviously there were moments where he did hit a home run with it, but as a whole, he couldn't get it all there. And obviously one of the other things that hurts this film as well, we just talked about Suspiria there, the previous film where you had Goblin doing the music. Obviously you had Goblin coming on Deep Red, did Suspiria, they would obviously go on to do Tenebrae, but for some reason they didn't come back to do Inferno. They got Keith Emerson, and I'm sorry, but Keith Emerson doesn't cut it. I'm sorry. There's some music he does in the latter part of the film that does actually get into that Goblin territory, and that's very welcome. It's very good, but it's too little too late. Also, earlier in the first half of the film, they use an operatic piece by Verdi, and that's very effective. But again, that's library music. That's not something you can attribute to Keith Emerson. So I think that's another thing that hurts this film, the fact that it didn't have a Goblin score. But again, there's some really, really great set pieces. All the stuff with Irene Miracle. Again, getting into kind of spoilers, but she's like the Sarah character, obviously, who's investigating the whole thing and basically drags Susie Bannion into it in Suspiria. Have the same thing here. Irene Miracle's character, she's the one investigating it, and then she drags her brother into it. What's the heartbreaking thing is, when we talk about, obviously, when we hit that halfway mark, that's why Irene Miracle's character dies. So basically, she, that's go figure, the first half of the movie where she's in it, that's the best part of the film. Because I'm sorry, the character of her brother, who's played by Lee McCloskey, I'm sorry, Mark is the character. I'm sorry, there's nothing to this character. I'm sorry, he's bland. So I think that's another thing that hurts the film. But yeah, Inferno it's again, moments of greatness. And there's some moments, I would go so far as to say there's some moments in Inferno that are the greatest moments that we've ever seen in an Argento in an Argento movie. But the whole package just doesn't quite make it, which is heartbreaking to say, but But yeah, obviously, I just thought that would be a neat way to bring this all together. So we've spotlighted a film by Mario Bava with Lisa and the Devil. We've spotlighted a film by Dario Argento with Suspiria, and then we talk about a film in Inferno where they both come together to make something. Obviously, not under the most ideal of circumstances, given that Argento was really in a bad way throughout the making of it, but it happened. So that's a way to just bring this all together. Obviously, there's so much that can be talked about with, well, obviously Mario Bava and Dario Argento, but obviously Italian cinema as a whole. But that was just, again, just trying to keep it almost as a focused, if you want to call it a case study, almost. But yeah, I just, again, just going back and rewatch, well, obviously I've rewatched Lisa and the Devil yesterday. I've been going back through the past few weeks and rewatching a lot of Argento's stuff, obviously Suspiria and Inferno, to name two of them. But it's just, these movies are an absolute treat, you know. And even, as I said, with Inferno, you know, it's half of a perfect movie, but that's what makes it so fascinating. And there's stuff, as we get into that the second half, where we're talking about the moments of greatness, you know, we see this apartment block that Irene Miracle's been living in, where she's been investigating you know, she's felt as though there's a presence of a witch there, and obviously it would ultimately be Mater Tenebrarum, the Mother of Darkness. And obviously this apartment building's been the home to her, like how the dance academy in Suspiria was home to Helena Marcos. We've got the same thing here, but this apartment building, again, you talk about the gorgeous set design and production design. You know, the set design for the dance academy in Suspiria was absolutely first class, and we got much the same here. It's absolutely gorgeously done. And then we get to the finale of Inferno, where you know, Mark, the McCluskey character, the Lee McCluskey character, comes face to face with Mater Tenebrarum, and the exchange that they have is fascinating. And there's this awesome sequence where they're stood by a mirror and Mater Tenebrarum disappears, so you could, and then you see her only in the mirror, but in terms of in the physical world, she's gone and she exists only in the mirror. It's a fascinating sequence and it's damn good, but frustratingly, it's so goddamn short, and the stuff that's hinted at in the dialogue that she has, that the two characters have, where you're thinking, whoa, hang on, could we have a bit more elaboration on that, please? But then it's like, oh no, abrupt ending. It's like, no, the movie's over. But again, I mean, I can appreciate you don't want to explain everything. You know, you want to maintain that element of mystery there. That's fine, but can you just give us a bit longer than 2 minutes? I know women around the world have been wishing that for a long time, but I know how you feel. But yeah, it's like we get this, you know, we come face to face with the big bad of the film, and you're engaging in this dialogue that's getting really interesting. Then we have this awesome sequence where she vanishes and she exists in the mirror, and then the mirror shatters, and then we see this Grim Reaper-esque figure. And then the whole building goes up in flames, much like at the end of Suspiria. And it's basically at that point, so we've had this really cool sequence, and then it's kind of like we just fall into the, oh, wash, rinse, repeat, we're going to blow the building up and set it ablaze like we did at the end of Suspiria. You know, we have our lead character running through the building as things blow up around him, and it's like, oh, okay, so yeah, you just rehashed. But also, one thing that Suspiria had that Inferno lacks, when Susie Bannion comes face to face with Helena Marcos, she kills her. Yeah, like she vanquishes the witch. We don't even get that here. She just, Mater Tenebrarum's just left within, I mean, I suppose you could say the buildings are being set ablaze, so obviously how the life force is connected to the building. If the building is destroyed, she'll be destroyed also, or vice versa. I suppose you can explain it away like that, but it just lacks something of a satisfying conclusion, whereas obviously Suspiria is the abrupt ending where it feels satisfying to a certain extent, whereas that's absent from Inferno. But it's one of those things, you know, Inferno, is fascinating when you think obviously what could have been, and it's interesting obviously the not remake, that's Luca Guadagnino doesn't do remakes because he's an artist, he does a reimagining. You know, Luca Guadagnino did his reimagining of Suspiria with Dakota Johnson and Tilda Swinton, and again, I'll hold my hands up, I didn't see it because I don't understand why Suspiria needs a remake or reimagining. I think, to be honest, Inferno is the one that would have benefited more, but you know, we'll see if that ever materialises. So that brings this to a close. Thank you for listening to me ramble. This is, you know, it's just been me talking into the ether about Mario Bava and Dario Argento. I hope you've found it interesting and informative, or I apologise if I've been telling people a lot of stuff they already knew, but I just wanted to talk about it because these films, you know, Italian giallos, I just adore these things. But again, this is the thing to take away. These films often, they're just watched to be, it's the experience. It's difficult to put it into words, but it's the experience of them that's so special or profound, if you want to call it that. But that brings us to a close. Thank you for bearing with me as I've gone for all of 66 minutes. Jesus. But yeah, that wraps this up. In short, Mario Bava's awesome, Dario Argento's awesome, Lisa and the Devil's awesome, Suspiria's awesome, and Inferno, it's half awesome, but even that's better than a lot of films. So thank you for listening to me ramble. Check them out if you'd like. I hope you enjoy them, and have a wonderful Halloween. Hey, it's prime time, baby. But thank you for listening to me ramble. I will see you all next time. Wishing everybody all the best. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.